Hearty Yasher Koach to Miriam Avens. Beautiful job leading Shacharit this morning as we look to Seder Kriyat HaTorah, our Torah service, page 96. If you're standing and you'd like to sit, you can do so.
Chesed Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu, Adonai
may be seated. The Torah reading for the second day of Rosh Hashanah is, of course, the story of Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. I'll say a very brief word about that in a moment, but just a reminder that as we do honors with open seating, just to keep look out for the honors numbers, and if you have an honor coming up, to come and join Jody in the on-deck circle over here, this sort of general area at the bench. The AD ramp, if you need it, is also that direction. The story of the binding of Isaac is one of the most challenging in our tradition. I spoke in depth about it last year and about the value of confronting difficult texts and allowing them to challenge our assumptions about the world, about God, about human behavior, about religiosity. All I want to say now is once again to invite us into that space. We hear these words, and if they don't affect us in some way deeply, we're not paying attention. And I would suggest to you that the best texts, whatever they are, whether they're biblical texts or rabbinic texts, are the ones that shake us to our core. And then the question is, what do we do with that sense of shakenness? What do we do when we're trembling inside? Do we lash out? Do we love? Do we open our arms? Do we try to understand those who are different from us? Do we try to understand the urge to follow a God in ways that we might find problematic? Do we try to understand how human authors may have taken human experiences and conveyed them in a way that makes us uncomfortable? Whatever we're doing with this text, it should affect us. And of course, Rosh Hashanah is meant to affect us very deeply. When we get to that moment with the ram and the ram who is offered in place of Isaac, how does it connect us then to the experience of Tekiyat HaShofar that we'll hear a few moments later? We're on page 103, and we'll be calling on Neri Cohen, who will be leaning Torah for us today.
Yael Bat Natamen del Abraham HaKohen Danya Shaul and Harav Moshe Meira Bat Shava Lali Avishana Baruch Shatan Torah Ala Moise V'Kedushato V'Shem
Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim natan lanu et torato baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Vayhi acharei hadivarim ha'ele vayogad l'Avraham lemor. Vayhi achar hadivarim ha'ele v'ha'Elohim nisa et Avraham vayomer elav Avraham vayomer hineni vayomer kach na et bincha et yechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak v'lech lecha el eretz Moria v'ha'alehu sham le'ola al echad ha'arim asher omar elecha Vayashkem Avraham baboker vayachabosh et chamoro vayikach et shnei ne'arav ito ve'et Yitzchak beno vayvaka atzei ola vayakam vayelech el hamakom asher amar lo ha'Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Amen. Nala
בת שמן ופגי לעלייה שנייה.
Baruch Hu es Adonai HaMvorach. Baruch Adonai HaMvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayom hashlishi vayisa Avraham et einav vayar et hamakom merachok vayomer Avraham el yarav shvu lachem poim achamor v'ani ve'hanar nelcha ad ko v'nishtachave v'nashuva alechem vayikach Avraham et atzei ha'olah vayasem al Yitzchak beno vayikach biyado et ha'esh v'et ha'ma'achelet vayelchu shnehem yachdav Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham aviv Vayomer aviv Vayomer hineni b'ni Vayomer hine ha'esh v'ha'etzim v'ayeh haseh le'olah Vayomer Avraham Elohim yireh haseh le'olah b'ni Vayelchu shnehem yachdav.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher nasan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nasa b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Nalamot Harav Megaviva Bat David Moshe Tzobek Yatel Aliyah Shlishit.
Third Aliyah begins Pasuk Tet, page 104, verse 9.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMvorach. Baruch Adonai HaMvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayavo el hamakom asher malo Elohim vayiven sham Avraham et hamizbeach vayaroch et ha'etzim vayakod et Yitzchak beno vayasem oto al hamizbeach mimal ha'etzim vayishlach Avraham et yado vayikach et ha'ma'achelet lihishchot et beno vayikra elav malach Adonai min hashamayim vayomer Avraham Avraham vayomer hineni vayomer al tishlach yadcha el hanar ve'al taslo me'uma ki ata yadati ki arei Elohim ata v'lo chasachta et bincha et yechidcha mimeni vayisa Avraham et einav vayar v'naya yilachar nechaz basvach bekarnav vayelech Avraham vayikach et ha'ayil vayalehu leolah tachat beno vayikra Avraham shem hamakom hahu Adonai yireh asher yamer hayom behar Adonai yireh.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nasa b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen.
Amen. Alamod Ariel ben Ruben Elisheva Bakadalia Aliyah Revit.
Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMvorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMvorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch אשר בחרנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Amen. ויקרא מלאך אדוני אל אברהם שנית מן השמיים ויאמר בי נשבעתי נאום אדוני כי יען אשר עשית את הדבר הזה ולא חסכת את בנך את יחידך כי ברך אברכך בהרבה ארבה זרעך ככוכבי השמיים וכחול אשר על שפת הים וירש זרעך את שאר אויביו ויתברכו בזרעך כל גויי הארץ עקב אשר שמעת בקולי וישב אברהם על נהריו ויקומו וילכו יחדיו אל באר שבע וישב אברהם בבאר שבע.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם אתה בתוכנו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן.
Amen. Alamod. Masha bracha bat. Beryl Chasa v. Gershon ben. Reuven. Aliyah Hamishi.
Fifth Aliyah, Pasuk Chaf, verse 20, page 105.
אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן. ויהי אחרי הדברים האלה ויוגד לאברהם לאמור הנה ילדה מילכה גם היא בנים לנחור אחיך את עוץ בכורו ואת בוז אחיו ואת כמואל אבי אברהם ואת כסד ואת חזו ואת פילדש ואת ידלף ואת בתואל ובתואל ילד את רבקה 8 אלה ילדה מילכה לנחור אחי אברהם ופילגשו ושמה ראומה ותלד גם היא את טבח ואת גחם ואת תחש ואת מחר.
אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם אתה בתוכנו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
We rise as the Sifrei Torah are laid side by side for Chatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתקדש שם רבה וילמד יברח חירותי ואמלך וחייכו להיות ויומכון וחיי לכל בית ישראל בגן מזמן קריב ימרו אמן יש מרבה מבורך לעולם ויום יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי דקודש יברכו לילה לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן בעלמא
Yadom Abiyah Golel, the Sefer Rishon. וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל על פי אדוני יד משה. תורה, 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 ציווה לנו משה. תורה, 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 ציווה לנו משה. תורה, 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 ציווה לנו משה. תורה, 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 ציווה לנו משה. מורשה קהילת יעקב, מורשה קהילת יעקב, מורשה קהילת יעקב, תורה ציוונו משה. May be seated. נעמוד. צביה עליה בת מרדכי דחווה מפטירה.
The Maftir Aliyah, page 106.
Baruch Adonai Habarach. Baruch Adonai Habarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai Habarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Notenu Torah.
Amen.
אמן. ובחודש השביעי, באחד לחודש, מקרא קודש יהיה לכם, כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו, יום תרועה יהיה לכם, ועשיתם עולה לריח ניחוח לאדוני, פר בן בקר, אחד אייל אחד, כבשים בני שנה, 7 תמימין, ומין חתם סולת גלולה בשמן, 3 עשרונים לפר, 2 עשרונים לאייל, בשרון אחד לכבש האחד, לשבעת הכבשים, וסריזים אחד חטאת לכפר עליכם, מלבד עולת החודש ומנחתה, ועולת התמיד ומנחתה, ונזקיהם כמשפטם, לריח ניחוח אישל אדוני.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tokenu. Baruch Atah Adonai Notenu Torah.
Amen.
Amen. Yandu Amabi Abagolel, the Sefer Sheni. Please rise. וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל על פי אדוני ביד משה. יצרים היא למחזיקים בה לתומכיה תושר דרכיה דרכי נועם כל נתיבותיה Shalom, Yisrael, Yisrael, ve'orai tachatu, Yisrael, Yisrael, ve'orai tachatu, Torah, 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 Hallelujah, Torah, 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 Hallelujah.
The Haftarah begins on page 108. Oh, I'm sorry, not 108. 111. Second page. Need this?
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nbiim tovim
ורצה בדבריהם הנאמרים באמת. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בתורה ובמשה עבדו ובישראל עמו ובנביאי האמת והצדק. כה אמר אדוני מצא חן במדבר עם שרידי חרב הלוך להרגיע ישראל מרחוק אדוני נראה לי ואהבת עולם אבטיח על כן משכתי חסד עוד אבנך ונבנית בתולת ישראל עוד תעדי תופייך ויצאת במחול משחקים עוד תתאיך כרמים בהרי שומרון נתון נודים וחיללו כי יש יום קראו נוצרים בהר אפרים קומו ונעלה ציון אל אדוני אלוהינו כי כה אמר אדוני רנו ליעקב שמחה וצהלו בראש הגויים השמיעו הללו ואמרו הושע אדוני את עמך את שארית ישראל הנני מביא אותם מארץ צפון וקיבצתי מירכתי ארץ בם עבר ופיסח הרב יולדת יחדיו קהל גדול ישובו הנה בבכי יבואו ובתחנונים אובילם הוליכם את נחלי מים בדרך ישר לא יכשלו בהר כי הייתי לישראל לאב ואפרים בכורי הוא שמעו דבר אדוני גויים והגידו באים ממרחק ואמרו מזרח ישראל יקבצנו ושמרו קראו את שמו כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ובאו ורננו ואמרון ציון ונערו אל טוב אדוני אל דגן ואל תירוש ואל יצהר ועל בני צאן ובקר והייתה נפשם כגן רבה ולא יוסיפו לדבר עוד אז תשמח בתולה במחול ובחורים וזקנים יחדיו והפכתי אבלם לששון וניחמתים ושימחתים מגונם וריביתי נפש הכהנים דשן ועמי את טובי יספרו נאום אדוני כה אמר אדוני קול ברמה נשמע נהי בכי תמרורים רחל מבכה על בניה מענה לנחם על בניה כי איננו כה אמר אדוני מנעי קולך מבכי ועינייך מדמעה כי יש שכר לפעולתך נאום אדוני ושבו מארץ אויב ויש תקווה לאחריתך נאום אדוני ושבו בנים לגבולם שמוע שמעתי אפרים מצנודד יסרתני ויבשר כעגל לא lumad השיבני ואשובה כי אתה אדוני אלוהי כי אחרי שובי נחמתי ואחרי היוועדי ספקתי על ירך בושתי וגם נכלמתי כי נשאתי חרפת נעורי הבן יקר לי אפרים אם Ed Shashuim Kimidei Dabribo Zachor Ezkirenu Od Alkein Hamu Me'ai Lo Rachim Rachamenu Ne'um Adonai Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol holamim, tzaddik bechol adorot, hel hane'eman homer ve'oseh, hamadaber umkayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek. Ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim devarecha, v'davar echad midvarecha, chor lo yashuv rekam, ki el melech ne'eman v'rachaman atah, baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el ha'ne'eman b'chol devarav. Rachem al Tzion ki beit chayenu v'la'aluvat nefesh toshia b'meira v'yameinu. Baruch atah Adonai v'sameach Tzion b'baneha. Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu b'Eliyahu hanavi avdecha v'malchut Beit David Mashiachecha b'meira yavo v'yagel libenu al kiso lo yeshev zar v'lo yinchalu od acherim et kivodo ki v'shem kodshecha nishbata lo shelo yichben eiro le'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Magen David Al Torah, v'al avodah, v'al nabim, v'al yom hazikaron hazeh, shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu lichbod ultifaret. Al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umvarchim otach, yitbarech shimcha b'fi kol chai tamid le'olam va'ed, udvarcha emet v'kayam la'ad, baruch atah Adonai, melech al kol haaretz, mekadesh Yisrael v'yom hazikaron.
This time we rise for the prayer for our country, page 117. Yasher Koch to Carol Berkauer. Beautiful job on Haftarah.
Our God and God of our ancestors, with mercy accept our prayer
on behalf of our country and its government. Pour out your blessings upon this land, upon its leaders, judges, and officers and officials who are devoted in good faith to the needs of the public. Instruct them with the laws of your Torah, and help them understand your rules of justice, so that peace and security, happiness and freedom will never depart from our land. We pray, Adonai, God, the Spirit is in all creatures. Awaken that spirit within all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant among those of different nationalities and faiths who dwell in our nation love and companionship, peace and friendship. May it therefore be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and cause them to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me. Let us say, Amen. We'll remain standing for the prayer for Medinat Israel on 117 at the bottom.
Avinu Bashamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'Goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Ge'ulatenu. Again Aleha B'Rav Shchastecha, Ufaros Aleha Sukat Shlomecha, V'shlach Orcha V'mitcha L'Rashea, Tzarea V'yotzea, V'takneim Be'etza Tova Milfanecha, Chazek et Idei Mignei Eretz Kodshenu, V'anchilem Eloheinu Yeshua, V'ateret Nitzachon Ta'atreim, V'natata Shalom Ba'aretz, V'simchat Olam Liyoshveha, V'namar. Amen. You may be seated. This Rosh Hashanah I've been focused on Hayom Harat Olam, on these words which I mentioned yesterday are translated today is the birthday of the world, but Gerson Cohen Alav Shalom used to say today is pregnant with possibility.
And these are words that you'll hear later in Musaf with shofar. But as we turn to our shofar service, I want to actually move us backward rather than forward for a moment, and way, way, way backward to the very beginning of the universe, to the moment of creation itself, which if you look at Breshit, we're told pretty clearly that creation through a Jewish lens is not ex nihilo, but ex materia. It's not from nothing, but from something, or at least in a milieu that had something already. And what was that something? Was tohu vavohu, whatever that means. There was choshech, there was tahom. Maybe these are connected with sort of primordial evil elements from other faith traditions of the ancient world. But whatever it was, there was something that pre-existed creation, and it was a mess. It was disorderly. These were the forces of entropy that existed. And the really interesting thing is that a major midrashic collection, Breshit Rabbah, actually begins with a story kind of based on that section of Torah. And the story is about a king who builds a palace on a hill of trash. That's it. Breshit Rabbah, the famous collection, begins by telling the story about a king who builds a palace on a hill of trash. And then what does that mean? It means that the world that is created sits on perhaps a shaky foundation. Perhaps there's something beneath our feet that makes us uncomfortable, or that permeates creation in a way that moves creation in ways that are even dangerous at times. And yet, here we are, standing in this world, trying to proclaim its glory and its beauty on the new year. Professor Reuven Hammer, Zichrono Livracha, who actually passed away in August of this year, great scholar of liturgy and founder of the Masorti movement in Israel, mentions that anthropologists argue the shofar is an adaptation from pagan rituals. One purpose was to scare off demons at the turn of the year. In other words, there was this tradition that had to do with chaos and demons, and then we kind of appropriated this and turned it into the shofar service that we have today, or the symbol of the shofar that we have today. And this sentiment seems to have entered Jewish consciousness too. The Talmud says that the shofar has the power to confuse the accuser. And Hammer teaches that the Kabbalists add a psalm before the sounding of shofar. You'll see it in your machzor, right before we actually sound the shofar, and notice that the first letters of that psalm are an acrostic. It's on page 119. Kara Satan, destroy Satan. You might think that Satan is not a Jewish word, but actually it's a Hebrew word. And we understand Satan to be perhaps the accuser, perhaps some sort of adversary, or perhaps even a force within us that we call Yetzer Hara, mistranslated as the evil inclination, but really best translated probably as the id. And now think about the relationship of the id to the superego for a moment, and how actually it's not a bad thing, it just needs to be tempered and controlled. And so here we are thinking about the shofar calling us to attention, and a God who calls us to order by also calling the universe to order. Oseh shalom biramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, right? That God is making peace in the heavens, but what does that mean? God's ordering the heavens. God's trying to make sense out of this primordial soup, this chaos, this entropy that pre-existed the moment of creation. The shofar then, in this context, is both an invitation to confront that evil, that hill of trash on which we stand, and a reminder that we have work to do, because the world is constantly going to be going into a place of entropy. And our job is to be partners with God in creation, that is to say, in ordering the world, in making it a better place. The shofar service is on page 119 as we rise.
אשרי עם יודעי תרועה, אדוני בפניך ילכון, בשמך גילון כל היום, ובצדקתך ירומו.
You may be seated. Yasher Koch to Dan Appleby, to Emily, to our Torah holders, Judith and David. We're at Ashrei, page 120.
Ashrei Ashrei Beitecha, Od Hallelu Hasela. Tehila LeDavid, Aromim Chelo Hai HaMelech, Levacha Shimcha Le'olam Va'ed. Gadol Adonai Yimla Me'od, Ve'ligdulato Ein Cheker. Hadar Kevod Hodecha, V'divrei Niflotecha Asicha. Zecher Avtucha Yaviru, V'tzitatcha Yaranenu. Tov Adonai Lakol, V'rachamam al kol ma'asav. Kavod malchutcha yomamiru, V'uratecha yadakbiru. Malchutcha malchut kol amim, U'mamshatecha v'chol dor v'dor. Einecho enachai saperu, V'atano temahamet achlam b'yito. Sadik Adonai b'chol derechav, V'chasid b'chol ma'asav. Reitzon yirei av Yosef, V'et shavacham yishmor v'yoshiem. Tehilat Adonai yadaber pi, V'varech kol basar shimkat shel olam va'ed. Anachnu nevarech ya, me'atav yad olam, hallelujah.
Yasher Koach to Gavi Cantor and Emma Jeroff. Beautiful job. This time we rise as we prepare to return the Sifrei Torah to the Aron HaKodesh. We're on page 121.
Hallelujah, et Shem Adonai, in his Gam Shemo Levado.
Israel.
Page 123. Story from the Talmud. Every day, Hillel would go to work and earn half a dinar. Half of that would go for his food and family, while the other half he would give to the guard at the Beit Midrash. One day, he earned no money, and the guard at the Beit Midrash would not permit him to enter. Hillel climbed up on the roof and listened down through the skylight, so that he could hear the words of the living God from the mouths of Shmaya and Avtalion. It was Erev Shabbat in the middle of winter, and the snow began to fall. When the dawn rose, Shmaya said, "Brother Avtalion, every day this house is light, and today it is dark. Is it a cloudy day?" They looked up and saw the figure of a man on the skylight. They went up and they found Hillel covered with 3 cubits of snow. They took him down, they bathed him, placed him in front of the fire, saying, "This man deserves to have us violate Shabbat on his behalf." This is the humble origin story outlined in the Babylonian Talmud of perhaps the most venerated rabbi of all time, Hillel HaZaken, Hillel the Elder, the one whose academy inspired the bulk of halakha and practice to this day, the man who managed to get Jewish college student organizations across America named for him without donating a dime. He got his start not in the Beit Midrash, but on it, straining to hear through the skylight. Long before he was a great rabbi, he was an eager student who one day couldn't afford to pay the entrance fee to the Beit Midrash. So like something out of Looney Tunes, he manages to get himself stuck under several feet of snow, face pressed against the skylight, and from these humble beginnings, this young man ascends to become Nasi, the president of the Sanhedrin. Commenting on this parable, the Netziv, the 19th century dean of the Volozhin Yeshiva, invokes the famous line from Devarim that incidentally we read in Shul this past Shabbat, "Lo bashamayim hi velo me'ever layam." It is not in heaven, nor is it across the sea. He explains it is referring to one being discouraged from acquiring a deep understanding of the Torah due to its difficulty to comprehend and its great holiness. God, therefore, says the Netziv, states that it is within our grasp, for if you apply great toil and study in order to acquire various forms of knowledge and skills and analysis, you will achieve it. How many Jewish parents have told their children, if you work hard enough, if you set your mind to it, you can accomplish anything? This meritocratic value is woven into the very fabric of our Jewish tradition. We democratize Torah, making it a thing within our grasp, and through it we democratize divine access. We were reformers long before the Reform movement, long before the Reformation. We, the people of the book, are meant to read the book and the commentary and the commentary on the commentary, and add our own commentary too. And so the story goes, if you think you're too poor or too rich and busy with your business affairs, or too vain to learn Torah, the Talmud offers each person, each of these categories, a role model. Hillel mechayev et ha'aniim. Hillel obligates the poor. Rabbi Eliezer ben Charsum mechayev et ha'ashirim. Rabbi Eliezer ben Charsum obligates the rich. Yosef mechayev et ha'rishaim. And Joseph, who was plenty handsome and didn't allow his beauty to prevent him from making righteous choices, obligates the wicked. And this meritocratic Jewish story maps well onto a similar American story, one in which immigrants tell their children, as many of our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents did, to just learn the language, work hard, get an education. Do that, they said, and you'll go far. But today I want to question this myth of meritocracy, because it's not the whole story, not the whole Jewish story, not the whole American story. At the conclusion of Heidi Schreck's remarkable What the Constitution Means to Me, the playwright, a middle-aged white woman, and a young African-American student debate the salvageability of the U.S. Constitution itself. One party argues the document with further amendments and a more equitable application of the rule of law can be saved. The other party argues that it cannot. The audience is left to decide, and the correct choice at the conclusion of Schreck's heartwarming and heartbreaking tale, I must confess, is not so clear. The through line of her play, The Conundrum of Liberal Democracies, is also the subject of Adam Gopnik's 1,000 Small Sanities, his new treatise on liberalism. Now, to be clear, liberalism is not about a particular political party, and Gopnik spends much of the book defending attacks on it from the right and from the left. Liberal democracy is a system of government, ostensibly our own, in which progressives and conservatives participate. That doesn't mean that most conservatives call themselves liberals, but it does mean that in the classical sense, what distinguishes liberal democracies from despotism is not the fact of elections, even fair ones. No, it is the extent to which they avoid what de Tocqueville, Mill, and others understand as a tyranny of the majority. Gopnik defends liberalism this way. See if you hear echoes of basic Jewish values in his words. A hatred of cruelty, a belief in radical change through practical measures, a readiness to act non-violently but visibly, and sometimes in the face of threatened violence on behalf of equality. A belief that life should be fair, or fairer, or as fair as seems fair. People's lives should not be overdetermined by who their parents were, or how much money they've inherited, or what shade of skin their genes have woven. We know the mantra. Work hard and you can succeed no matter what your station and background. But hopefully we also know that simply isn't the case. The zip code where you were born is as good an indicator of any and better than most in determining how likely you are to amass wealth, to obtain a passport, to receive a college education, even to live a long life. So much of what Americans achieve is tied to their circumstances, their race or gender or sexual orientation, and in fact there is an emerging consensus in liberal circles about privilege, whether male privilege, Christian privilege, white skin privilege, hetero or cisgender privilege, the privilege of an able body, and so on. More and more of us recognize that our life's achievements, hard-won though so many of them were also brought about by luck, of who we are, where and to whom we were born. Faced with the enormity of these structural and institutional inequities, it's tempting to lift up and support extreme positions. And there are those voices throughout Jewish history and literature. But while radical positions have merit, they warrant consideration and stimulate real discussion about issues beyond the facile or superficial, revolution rarely succeeds. And usually in the end, it does more harm than good. the liberal would claim, says Gopnik, that lasting positive change is mostly achieved incrementally. He calls liberals radicals of the real. The Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, tells of two rabbis who once walked through the dark Arbel Valley in the eastern Galilee. Looking up, they saw the very first rays of dawn. Rabbi Chia said, "This is how Israel's redemption will look. First, it will be little by little, but as it continues, it will grow in momentum." Modern Hasidim like Chabad, for example, proclaim, "We want Mashiach now." Normative Rabbinic Judaism suggests, "We want Mashiach later." Not a great rallying call, I'll admit, but more pragmatic when it comes to doing the steadfast and often thankless work of pressing communities and societies toward justice and greater equity. The other problem with meritocracy is it foregrounds what we achieve at the expense of how we did so. Too often, we worship the politics of getting things done. And it's the rare politician, I think, who does what he or she knows is right over that which is expedient or who sees beyond the quid pro quo. But Rosh Hashanah, by the way, I wrote this before the recent revelations, I want to be clear. Rosh Hashanah isn't about what we achieve, it's about how we behave. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah are the factors that ma'avirin et roa hagzera. They temper the severity of the decree, enabling us to inscribe ourselves in the book of life. There's no al-chet for the sin of earning too little money or even not knowing enough Torah. But greed, abuse, neglect, condescension, gossip, cynicism, they all make the list. There's an aphorism attributed to Robespierre, but best delivered by Jack Nicholson. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. In 1994, just a few years before his death, Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher and political theorist, clearly with this sentiment in mind, delivered what he called a short credo to the University of Toronto. It was read on his behalf and then published 20 years later in the New York Review of Books under the title A Message to the 21st Century. Many of the sins of Berlin's own generation, he felt, could be traced in some way to the advent of Marxist ideology. He wrote, "They were, in my view, not caused by the ordinary negative human sentiments, as Spinoza called them, fear, greed, tribal hatreds, jealousy, love of power, though of course these have played their wicked part. They have been caused in our time by ideas, or rather by one particular idea. It is paradoxical that Karl Marx, who played down the importance of ideas in comparison with impersonal, social, and economic forces, should by his writings have caused the transformation of the 20th century, both in the direction of what he wanted and by reaction against it." The German poet Heine, in one of his famous writings, told us not to underestimate the quiet philosopher sitting in his study. If Kant had not undone theology, he declared, Robespierre might not have cut off the head of the King of France. And then he goes on to disentangle Marxism or any fundamentalism, left or right, from liberalism. "Let me explain," he said. "If you are truly convinced that there is some solution to all human problems, that one can conceive an ideal society which men can reach if only they do what is necessary to attain it, then you and your followers must believe that no price can be too high to pay in order to open the gates of such a paradise. Men have always craved for liberty, security, equality, happiness, justice, knowledge, and so on, but complete liberty is not compatible with complete equality. If men were wholly free, the wolves would be free to eat the sheep. The solution, argues Berlin, is what we call liberal democracy. We must weigh and measure, bargain, compromise, and prevent the crushing of one life form by its rivals. I know only too well that this is not a flag, he says, under which idealistic and enthusiastic young men and women may wish to march. It seems too tame, too reasonable, too bourgeois. It does not engage the generous emotions. But you must believe me, one cannot have everything one wants, not only in practice, but even in theory. The denial of this, the search for a single overarching ideal, because it is the one and only true one for humanity, invariably leads to coercion and then to destruction, blood. Eggs are broken, but the omelet is not in sight. There is only an infinite number of eggs, human lives ready for the breaking, and in the end, the passionate idealists forget the omelet and just go on breaking eggs. The point this Rosh Hashanah I'm trying to make is that we need to stop lifting up exclusively, or even first and foremost, those stories of exceptionalism, of poor students on roofs who become Hillels. And we need to stop pretending that every student can become a Hillel. Most, try as they might, through no fault of their own, will not. What we need is to stop charging everyone the same for access to the Beit Midrash. And we need to stop assuming that because certain people succeed, it is because they were the most worthy. Dr. Evan Parker does analytics about law firm hires the way that Jonah Hill's character selected baseball players in the movie Moneyball. Who's seen Moneyball? Remember his character? The wonky analyst. Parker has a fascinating observation, with apologies to the lawyers in the room. If a law firm's goal is to hire the very best lawyer for their firm, even the ones they call rainmakers, they should give zero consideration to where she or he went to law school. The top 14, argues Parker, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, etc., expensive to attend, and the prime indicator of which attorneys are most likely to get hired by top firms, shouldn't be. Quite simply, they don't necessarily produce better lawyers. And that's before you get, says author Malcolm Gladwell, to the somewhat arbitrary metrics of the LSAT, which largely tests for speed over deep analytical thought, and for which the most successful students can afford to pay large sums of money for preparatory classes. Yet, the best firms do hire from the top schools, and Supreme Court justices tap these students for clerkships. And the whole system reinforces this presumably meritocratic ideal, which is less about merit and more about who you know and how privileged you are. Some have called this the mirror-tocracy, because how you get ahead is so often connected to who you know. And who we know is based on something hardwired into our brains, something social scientists call salience. We humans are favorably inclined toward those with whom we have the most in common, racially, geographically, gender-wise, and so on. What then might be the liberal democratic solution to the myth of meritocracy? Well, there are structural solutions to be sure, because these are structural challenges. And perhaps that's a sermon for another day, and it's worth delving into some of those structural solutions and trying to better understand the structural challenges. But since it's Rosh Hashanah, and at this moment, at least I think most of us are focused on our own personal journeys and our family journeys and our communal journeys, let's focus for a moment on interpersonal solutions. And liberal democratic societies, I would suggest to you, ask that institutions and individuals walk a common path. So let's ask ourselves, how might we use salience, privilege, power, and access for good? The answer is some version of tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, to live a life of sufficient integrity. So we are rodfei tzedek, we are pursuers of justice. And that when opportunities present themselves to do right, we are mensch enough to do so. One final story to illustrate my point. The Chafetz Chaim, a venerated 19th century sage, was once asked to appear in court as a character witness for one of his students who had been accused of spying by the Tsarist police. The story goes that before he summoned the rabbi to the witness stand, the lawyer approached the judge and said, "Your Honor, The rabbi who is about to testify has an impeccable reputation among his fellow Jews. They tell a story that one day he came home and saw a thief rummaging through his living room. The frightened thief climbed out of a window and ran off with some of the rabbi's possessions. And the rabbi ran after him, shouting, "I declare all of my property ownerless," so that the thief would not be liable for a crime. The judge looked at the lawyer with suspicion in his eyes. "Do you believe that that story really happened?" "I don't know, Your Honor," the lawyer replied, "but they don't tell stories like that about you and me." Shana Tova. Chavra, at this time we turn in our Machzor to page 123. 123 for Chatzi Kaddish. Please rise. As we enter into our private Amidah space, I want to remind us that we're offering two different possibilities for Musaf today. You can stay here and daven with us the traditional prayers, or you can head downstairs where Steve Siegel is going to be doing a session on learning meditation, Hineni, and exploring the relationship between Hineni and Hineni. Either is great, and when you're finished downstairs, if you want to come join us for the conclusion of the service, you're certainly invited to do so. The private Amidah begins on page 125 and it goes through page 139. Tikia. Shvarim Trua. Tikia. Tikia. Shvarim. Tikia. Tikia. Trua. Tikia Gedola.
Hineni evani mimas nirash unifechad mipachad yoshev tehilot Yisrael Yoshev tehilot Yisrael Bati lamod ulitechanen lefanecha Amcha Yisrael Asher shlachuni Afal pi sheni chedai ve'agon lechach Lachen havakesh mimcha Eloi Avraham, Eloi Yitzchak ואלוהי יעקב, אלוהי שרה, אלוהי רבקה, אלוהי רחל, ואלוהי לאה, אדוני, אדוני, אל רחום וחנון, אלוהי ישראל, שדי היום ונורא. אינה מצליח דרכי, אינה מצליח דרכי, אשר אני הולך לעמוד ולבקש רחמים עלי, לבקש רחמים עלי, עלי, ועל שוכי, ונעל תפשי בחטאותי, ואל תחי בממונותי, כי חוטא פושע, ינקמו בשער, לא יבושו בי, לא יבושה בהם. וקבל תפילתי כתפילת רגיל, בקולו נעים ופרקו נאה, ומעורב בדעת עם הבריות. ותיגע בשטן לבל יסטינני, בינה דילוגנו עליך הבא, ועל כל פשעים תכסה באהבה, וכל צרות ורעות הפכנה לנו, ולכל ישראל לששון ולשמחה, לחיים ולשלום, האמת והשלום אהבו, לא ישו מכשול בפעילתי. ויהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני, אלוהי אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, שרה ורבקה, רחל ולאה, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, אהיה אשר אהיה, שתבוא תפילתי לפני כיסא כבודך, בעבור כל הצדיקים והחסידים, התמימים והישרים, ובעבור כבוד שמך הגדול והנורא, כי אתה שומע תפילת עמך ישראל ברחמים. ברוך אתה שומע תפילה.
Rise as the ark is opened. We're on page 141.
Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol, HaGibor VeHaNorah, El Elyon, Gomel, Chasadim Tovim, Bekonei HaKol, Zocher Chastei Avot, ומביא גואל בני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מסוד חכמים ונבונים ומלמד דעת מבינים הבטחה פי בתפילה ובתחנונים, לכלות ולחנין, פני מלך, מלכי המלכים, ואדוני האדונים.
Welcome to be seated.
זוכרנו לחיים, מלך חפץ וחיים, מלך חפץ וחיים, וחפצנו בספר החיים, למען כבודך ואלוהים חיים, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, ברוך שמו, מגן אברהם ופוקד שרה. אמן. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני בחיי מתים, אתה רב הושיע. בחכה חיים בחסד, בחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני העם. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומתעורר, מלך מנהיג ומקיים ומצמיח ישועה. מי כמוך ברחמים זוכר יצוריו, לחיים רחמים נאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני, ברוך שמו, לחיי המתים.
Eliza Rothenberg is going to lead us responsively in the left-hand column on page 143.
When we really begin a new year, it is decided.
And when we actually repent, it is determined.
Who shall be truly alive and who shall merely exist?
Who shall be happy and who shall be miserable?
Who shall attain fulfillment in their day, and who shall not attain fulfillment in their day?
Who shall be tormented by the fire of ambition, and who shall be overcome by the waters of failure?
Who shall be pierced by the sharp sword of envy, and who shall be torn by the wild beast of resentment?
Who shall hunger for companionship, and who shall thirst for approval?
Who shall be shattered by the earthquake of social change, and who shall be plagued by the pressures of conformity?
Who shall be strangled by insecurity, and who shall be stoned into submission?
Who shall be content, and who shall wander in search of satisfaction?
Who shall be serene, and who shall be distraught?
Who shall be at ease, and who shall be afflicted with anxiety?
Who shall be poor in their own eyes, and who shall be rich in tranquility?
Who shall be brought low with futility, and who shall be exalted through achievement?
But repentance, prayer, and good deeds have the power to change the character of our lives.
Let us resolve to repent, to pray, and to do good deeds, so that we may begin a truly new year.
We rise as the ark is open for Untitled Chapter on page 143.
ובכן לך תעלה קדושה, כי אתה אלוהינו מלך. ונתנת תוקף קדושת היום, כי הוא נורא והיום. ובוא תינשא מלכותך, וייכון בחסד גיסך, ותשב עליו אמת, כי אתה הוא דיין ומוכיח, ויודע בעת, וחוטא וחותם, וסופר ומונה, ותזכור כהן נשכחות. ותפתח את ספר הזיכרונות, ומאליו יקרא, ומאליו יקרא, וחתם יעקב עמו, ובשופר גדול ייתקע, וכל דמעות הקנים יישמע, ומלאכים יקפצו בגבורת היוחס, בגבורת היוחס צור, ויאמרו הנה יום הדין, נפקוד על צבא מרום בדין, כי לא יזכו עיניך בדין, וכל בעולם יעברון לפניך, יעברון לפניך, כפני מרום. Give Katevun Uveyom Som Kippur
On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on the fast day of atonement it is sealed. How many will pass on and how many will be born? Who will live and who will die? Who will live a long life and who will come to an untimely end? Who will perish by fire and who by water? Who by sword? Who by beast? Who by hunger? Who by thirst? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who will be strangled and who will be stoned? Who will be at peace and who will be troubled? Who will be serene and who will be disturbed? Who will be tranquil and who will be tormented? Who will be impoverished and who will be enriched? Who will be brought low and who will be raised up? Together, but tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah have the power to transform the harshness of our destiny.
Uteshuva, utefila, utzedakah, ma'aviri leroa hagezela. כי כשמך כן תהילתך קשה לכעוס ונוח לרצות, כי לא תחבוט במות המת, כי אם שובו מדרכו וחיה, יד יום אותו תחכה לו, אם ישוב מיד תקבלו, אמת כי אתה הוא יוצרם, ואתה יודע יצרם, כי הם בשר ודם, אדם יסודו מעפר, וסופו לעפר, בנפשו יביא לחמו, משול כחרס הנשבר, כחציר יבש וכציץ נובל, כצל עובר וחנן קלה, וכרוח נושבת, וכבק פורח, וכחלום יאור.
אתה הוא מלך אל חי וקיים.
אתה הוא מלך אל חי וקיים. אין קצבה לשנותיך, ואין קץ אורך ימיך, ואין שול למקבל כבודך, ואין פירוש שלום שמך, שמך נאה לך, ואתה נאה לשמך, ושמנו קראת בשמך.
We remain standing for Kedusha.
עשה למען שמך, וקדש את שמך, מקדישי שמך, בעבור כבוד שמך הנרץ והנקדש, בסוד שיח שרפי קודש, המקדישים שמך בקודש, דרי מלאים, דרי מטה, ככתוב על יד נביאך, וקרא זה אל זה, ואמר, קדוש, 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 אדוני צבאות, מלך הארץ, כבודו. שואלים זה לזה, איה מקום כבודו, נאומתם ברוך יאמרו, ברוך כבוד אדוני ממקומו. יפן מרחמים ויעקונם יחנים שמו ערב ובוקר בכל יום תמיד המים מאהבה שמה אומרים שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. אלוהינו אבינו ומלכנו ומושיענו ומלכנו ומושיענו וישמיענו ברחמיו שנית שנית ואין כל חי להיות לכם להיות לכם להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדיר אדירנו אדוני אלוהינו ואדיר שמך לכל הארץ והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו דברי קודשך כתוב לאמור יברך אדוני לעולם אלוהי ציון לדור ודור הללויה לדור ודור כי קולך ונצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש לשבחך אלוהינו מפינו לאמור שלום בעת כי המלך קדוש וקדוש אתה.
May be seated.
קמו למעשיך ותשמח במעשיך ויאמרו לך חוסיך וצדקך ומוסיך תוקדש אדון על כל מעשיך.
We're on page 147.
God is the unseen one. No image can capture God. Equally then, God is the one about whom no descriptive words can truly be uttered. That may be the secret of the Jewish sensibility which makes the name of God unpronounceable.
There are moments, singular or common, depending perhaps on our personality, when we might feel the presence of God, and certainly others when our reality, tragic, joyous, uneventful, is so overwhelmingly with us that even the idea of God seems distant, perhaps ludicrous.
And then there are those moments of aloneness when the world seems barren and the idea of God seems distant, even absurd. The person of faith knows that presence and absence are equally true of the experience of God.
Sometimes God feels so close that one experiences the presence of an intimate companion, but the obverse is also true. And in those moments of absence, we question whether the experience of presence was only a delusion.
To have faith is equally to know doubt. The person of faith knows that the atheist is not a person who is bullheaded, unseeing, but rather someone who has exclusively experienced the absence, which is the lot of even the person of faith.
Both faithfulness to God and denial tell of our human reality. When the person of faith is in touch with the depth of his or her spiritual and rational consciousness, one knows that one's heart contains both truths. What are we to do then, other than to live faithfully with doubt?
We're on page 148, at the bottom of the page.
תוזכר לבדיך, ותמלוך הכל בייחוד, ככתוב ביד נביאך, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. וכן, תן פח אדוני אלוהינו על כל מעשיך ואימתך על כל מה שבראת, ויראוך כל המעשים, ישתחוו לפניך כל הברואים, ויעשו כולם אגודה אחת, לעשות את צונך בלבב שלם, כמו שידענו אדוני אלוהינו, שהשלטון לפניך, עוז בידך, וגבורה בימינך, ושמך נורא על כל מה שבראת, וכן, תן כבוד אדוני לעמך, תהילה ליראיך, ותקווה טובה לדורשך, ופתחון פה למייחלים לך, שמחה לארצך, וששון לעירך, וצמיחה קרן לדוד עבדך, בריך עדן בן אישה משיחך, במהרה ימינו. וכן, צדיקים יראו וישמחו, וישרים ילוזו, וחסידים גרועים יגילו, יודעת תקפוץ פיה, וכל הרשעה כולה כעשן תכלה, תדבר ממשלת זדון מן הארץ.
151.
ותמלוך אתה אדוני לבדך על כל מעשיך, בציון משכן כבודך, ובירושלים עיר קודשך, ככתוב בדברי קודשך, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהיך ציון, לדור ודור, הללויה. קדוש אתה ונורא שמך, אין אלוה מבלעדיך, ככתוב, ויבא אדוני צבאות במשפט, האל הקדוש מקדש בצדקה, ברוך אתה אדוני. ברוך שמו המלך הקדוש. אמן. אתה וחתנו מכל העמים אהבת אותנו ועשית בנו, ורוממנו מכל הלשונות, וקידשתנו מצוותיך, וקרבתנו מהקהילה לעבודתך, בשמך הגדול הקדוש עלינו קראת, ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו בעבד יום הזיכרון הזה, יום תרועה מקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים.
152, middle of the page.
אלוהינו ולאבותינו, רחם על אחינו בית ישראל הנתונים בצרה, ויוצאים מאפל לאורה, וקבל ברחמים את תפילת עמך בני ישראל, בכל מקום שמות כבודיהם, השופכים את ליבם לפניך, ביום הזיכרון הזה.
Page 153, Ochila La'el.
וכילה לאל, אכלה פניו, ושאלה ממנו מענה לשון, אשר בקהל העם השירה וזו, הביארננו ביד מפעליו, לאדם מרחי לב ומאדוני מענה לשון. אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך, יהיו לרצון נמרה פי וגיון ליבי לפניך. אדוני צורי וגואלי, צורי וגואלי. אדוני צורי וגואלי, צורי וגואלי.
Musaf Amidah is divided into three sections, Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofrot, and we're entering into Malchuyot now, the section that deals with God's sovereignty. Sometimes this is an aspect of God that we struggle with, the notion that God is powerful and that we sort of worship a sovereign, maybe the imagery on a throne. And I have to confess, I have trouble with that imagery as well. But maybe I can offer us something to think about as we enter into this section. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, there's a description of the monarchy of Israel. And if you pay close attention, you'll notice that it's very deliberate in saying that it's not necessarily the case that you're going to have a king once you enter into the land. And in fact, it takes a while. The whole book of Judges is about the sort of chaos of trying to have individual judges somehow stitch together their authorities into some sort of collective society, which really doesn't work all that well until you get to the monarchy. But Deuteronomy 17 makes very clear that it is not the monarchy that establishes the state. In fact, the state is established, the nation moves into its land, and the monarchy later is a solution to the problem of societal organization. In a way, the same thing could be said about this moment in our service, that calling God sovereign is a polemic against being too quick to place authority into the hands of human beings. In other words, why is it that we refer to Moshe Rabbeinu as Rabbeinu, right? Why is it that we are careful in America not to talk about George Washington as a king and how it was very important to him to not even allow people to call him president after he was no longer president? If you go to Mount Vernon, you learn this. Why? Because he wanted to make sure that people understood that president is a title, but it's not who you are. And in the same way, Moshe Rabbeinu is called Rabbeinu, perhaps, teaches Professor Micha Goodman, to make sure that it's clear that it's not Moshe Malkeinu. That there's only one king, there's only one sovereign, and it's never a person really. And so in a way, this moment is a reminder, a cautionary tale about humans and abuse of power. And perhaps as we bow down in this moment before God, and you're invited to take part and do so in the aisles, we even have some extra space this year if you want to come forward and try the actual prostration during Aleinu. Perhaps we think about not literally God as a king on a throne with a beard, God forbid. I think that's a problematic assertion about who God is, but invitation to think about what is sovereignty and whom we actually serve. Page 54, the Aron is open for Aleinu. The ark is closed, and once it is, we can be seated as we look to page 157.
Eloheinu v'levoteinu, milocha kol haolam kmo b'kvodecha, v'naseh kol haaretz b'karecha. Kofa b'dagon uzecha, al kol yoshvei tevel artzecha, v'yeda kol pa'u ki ata pe'alto, v'yavin kol yatzur ki ata yitzarto, v'yomar kol asher neshama b'apo, Adonai Elohei Yisrael melech. Malchuto bakol mashallah Eloheinu ve'eloheinu kadshenu b'mitzvotecha v'tein chalkeinu b'toratecha sabbeinu mituvecha v'samchenu b'yeshuatecha v'taher libenu l'ovdecha be'emet ki ata Elohim emet u'dvarcha emet v'kayam lad Baruch atah Adonai
Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo
Melech HaKol Haaretz Mikadesh Yisrael Melech HaKol Haaretz Mikadesh Yisrael Melech HaKol Haaretz Mikadesh Yisrael Mekadesh Yisrael Yom HaZikaron.
Amen.
Tkiya. Shvarim Trua.
ותוציא כאור משפטנו היום קדוש. הרשת שפתנו ירם לפניך ארם ונישא. הרשת שפתנו ירם לפניך ארם ונישא. מבין ומאזין מביט ומקשיב לכל קול תקייתנו. מבין ומאזין מביט ומקשיב לכל תקייתנו. ותקבל ברחמים ברחמים ורצון סדר סדר מלכויותינו.
We're on page 161.
ועל ידי עבדיך הנביאים כתוב לאמור, הלך וקראת באוזני ירושלים לאמור, כה אמר אדוני זכרתי
Page 162.
יזוכה כל נשכות אטום מעולם, ינשכך לפני כיסא כבודך, עקדת יצחק לזרעו היום, רחמים תזכור, ברוך אתה אדוני.
ברוך שמו,
זוכר הברית.
Tekiah.
Ram Ve'Nisa, Areshet Sifatenu, Yirav Lefanecha, El Ram Ve'Nisa. Mevinu mazin, mabitu makshiv, L'kol kol tkiyatenu. Mevinu mazin, mabitu makshiv, L'kol tkiyatenu. Utkabel berachamim, berachamim uvracham, Seder Seder, Zikronotenu.
We're now on page 166 for the Shofrot section. (166) is right after page 165, which is the page we're on.
ודברי קודשך כתוב לאמור, על אלוהים בתרועה, אדוני בקול שופר, ונאמר, בחצוצרות וקול שופר, הריעו לפני המלך אדוני, ונאמר, תיקעו בחודש שופר, בכסל יום חגנו, יחוק לישראל הוא, נשפט לאלוהי יעקב, ונאמר, Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah,
Guess what page we're on now? 166.
כי אתה שומע קול שופר ומאזין תרועה בידו מלח ברוך אתה אדוני
ברוך הוא ורב שמו
שומע קול תרועת עמו ישראל ברחמים להקשיב לכל תקייתנו. מבין ומאזין, מביט ומקשיב לכל תקייתנו. ותקבל ברחמים וברצון, סדר שופרותינו. ויצרון אלוהינו ועמך ישראל תפילתם.
Will forgiving and graceful days yet come, when you walk in the field as the innocent walk, and the soles of your feet caress the clover leaves, or pricked by stubble the sting will feel sweet? Or rain will overtake you, congregating drops tapping on your shoulder, your chest, your throat, your head refreshed, and you walk in the wet field, the quiet expanding within, like light peeking out of a cloud. And you will breathe the odor of the ridge, breathing quiet, and you will see the sun mirrored in the golden puddle. And daily affairs and life will seem simple, easy to touch, easy to love. You will walk in the field alone, not scorched by the flames of conflagrations on roads that bristled with horror and blood. With a heart at peace, you will once again be humble and bend like a blade of grass, like a human being.
The repetition concludes, or move towards its conclusion on page 167.
ויצרון אלוהינו ועמך ישראל לפי תפילתם אשר ותעבוד לפי ביתך ותהילתם יעבדך ברצון ותהיל רצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך ותחזן עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים ברוך אתה אדוני
ברוך הוא ברוך שמו
המחז ישכנתו לציון
אמן מודים אנחנו לך
הטוב כי לך לרחמך, גם לכם פעילותם וחסדיך, מעולם קיווינו לך, ועל כולם יפרח יתמם שמך, מלכנו תמיד לעולם ועד. אבינו מלכנו, זכור רחמך, וכבוש כעסך, וכלי דבר וחרב ורעב ושבי ומשקיט יבון, ושמד ומגפה ופגרה, וכל מחלה, וכל תקלה, וכל קטטה, וכל מיני פורעניות, וכל גזירה רעה ושנאת חינם, מעלינו ומעל כל בני בריתך, ומעל כל העולם. וכתוב לחיים טובים כל בני בריתך, וכל החיים יודוך סלע. ויעללו את שמך באמת, האל ישועתנו ויעזרתנו סלע. ברוך אתה אדוני.
ברוך הוא ברוך שמו
הטוב שמך ולך נאה להודות.
אמן.
אלוהינו ולאבותינו ברכם, ברכנו בברכה משולשת בתורה הכתובה ידי משה עבדך, אמורה מפי אהרון ובניו כהנים, עם קדושך כאמור, יברכך אדוני וישמרך.
כן יהי רצון.
יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונך.
כן יהי רצון.
יישא אדוני פניו אליך, ישם לך שלום.
כן יהי רצון.
שים שלום,
טובה וברכה, חן וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ישראל עמך.
ברכנו אבינו נתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו. תורה חיים ואהבה חסד וצדקה וברכה ורחמים וחיים בשלום.
שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חיים וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ישראל עמך.
ותאמנך לברך את עמך ישראל. בכל עת ובכל בשלומך.
שים שלום, טובה וברכה, חיים וחסד ורחמים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ישראל עמך.
בספר חיים וברכה,
בשלום ופרנסה טובה, נזכר וניכתב לפניך. אנחנו וכל עמך בית ישראל, לחיים טובים, לחיים טובים ולשלום, לחיים טובים ולשלום, לחיים טובים ולשלום, לחיים טובים, לחיים טובים ולשלום.
נאמר, יביאו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, לחיים טובים תכתבנו, אלוהים חיים, כותבנו בספר החיים. ככתוב, ואתם אבקים ברנה אלוהיכם, חיים כולכם היום.
Invited to rise as the Aron is open, page 170.
היום,
היום, היום, היום, היום, היום, היום, היום,
היום תאמצנו,
אמן. היום, 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 היום,
היום תברכנו,
אמן. היום, 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 היום,
היום תגדלנו,
אמן.
היום תדרשנו לטובה,
אמן.
היום תכתבנו לחיים טובים,
אמן. היום, 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 היום,
היום תקבל רחמים ורצון את תפילתנו,
אמן. היום, 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 היום,
היום תשמע שבתנו,
אמן. היום, 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 היום,
היום תתמכנו בימין צדקך, היום הזה תבינו שעשינו שמחים בבניין שלם, ככתוב ביד נביאך, ויודעים אל הר קודשי ושמחים בבית תפילתי, בבית תפילה יקרא לכל העמים, וצדקה ברכה ורחמים וחיים ושלום יהיה לנו לכל ישראל ולכל יושבי תבל עד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני
ברוך הוא שמו
עושה השלום.
אמן.
יגדל ויקרא שמי רבה. אמן. תברח יתבל מחמחתי וחייכון ויומכון וחייכו בישראל בגלה בזמן קריב ואמרו
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך ויעלם עולם בהמיה יתברך.
Sevilla, David, Levit, Alal, Shmed, Kudisha, Ela, Ela, Miko, Bechata, Beshirata, Tushata, Benachamata, Tamirama, Vimro. Amen. Kapel Soton Boton Khoyeswa Kotamon Shmai Bimro. Amen. Shamaraba Mishmai Bekayim Aleno Koyeswa El Bimro. Amen. Ose Shalom Bimromav Uyase Shalom Alenu Al Koyeswa El Bimro. Amen.
May be seated. Hoshana Tova, everyone. I look forward to hearing from those of you who were at Steve's meditation and learning how that was for you. A little jealous I couldn't go, but it was good to be here as well. There are a number of things coming up, and I just want to encourage you to, once again, if you haven't signed up for Tashlich, please sign up in advance to participate on the boat. The time window is short, tight, getting on the boat and departing. We want to make sure that we can get everyone on quickly so we can enjoy our hour and do the meaningful work of Tashlich in the Inner Harbor. Also, once again, Klei Kodesh, our instrumental, multi-generational Friday night service that we do twice in the summer in Druid Hill Park, we'll be doing monthly here in the sanctuary with our beautiful new layout and new sound system. Really excited about that with this open bima. The next one is October 1st. That's the first one of the cycle inside. Please do RSVP for that in advance and join us for dinner. I'm sorry, October 11th. What did I say? Not the 1st, the 11th. And not tonight, definitely not tonight. Friday night, October 11th. So please sign up and join us for Klei Kodesh. And on October 12th, we have our annual Poetry Shabbat. Charles Rammelkamp, is Charles still here? He's still here. But Charles has been organizing this for the past few years. We have a number of poets in the community. Some of them are really talented, published, and well-known poets, and some of them are like me, who just write poetry occasionally. It's a great group of people. Each year we have a theme. This year I think it's about coming home. Is that our theme this year? And each poet will select one of their own and one from someone else. So that'll be October 12th, and that Shabbat will be here. The first Shabbat of the month, typically, if you remember, is our Sanctuary Shabbat upstairs. But this particular month, because of Poetry Shabbat and because of how the Chagim fell, we felt that the 4th would, or the 5th rather, would make sense to do downstairs, and the 12th will be upstairs. That will also be our first potluck here at Beth Am. And please continue to make food. Follow the kashrut guidelines that we've been sending out for years. Whether you keep a kosher home or not, please bring your food, ingredient kosher food, vegetarian, dairy food, to join us on October 12th as we have our first potluck. And finally, on October 27th, there'll be a reception to honor Cantor Greenstein and the choir. As you know, Cantor Greenstein retired in June. We managed to find him, locate him in his witness protection program, and brought him ever so gently back to the shul to do his last High Holy Day cycle with us. But there will be a great opportunity to celebrate him, his leadership, and also the choir's work over these High Holy Days on October 27th at 1 o'clock downstairs in our social hall. We are now on page 100. Oh, sorry, one last thing. If you brought a machzor, good. Remember to bring your machzor again on Yom Kippur. If you didn't bring a machzor, you borrowed one of ours, please don't take it with you. It's ours. Leave it here, but don't leave yours here. Got it? All right, good. En Kelohenu, 172.
En Kelohenu,
En Kadonenu, En Kemalkeinu, En Kenoshienu, Mi Kelohenu, Mi Kadonenu, Mi Kemalkeinu, Mi Kenoshienu, Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Emalkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shetiru, Avotenu, Lefanecha, Et Torah.
As we rise for Aleinu, I've had a request for an update on Joe Wilson's health status. Joe is fine. I spoke to him yesterday. Those who weren't here, he had a health incident here. He's okay, came home from the hospital, and he seems to be just okay. The reason he's not here today, that was planned. He was going to go with his father to Beth Israel today. So Joe is good, and all is right with the world. Aleinu, page 173.
Aleinu Shabeach L'Adon HaKol,
Latent Gedula Yosef Bereshit, Shelo Asanu Kegoye Haratzot, Velo Samanu K'mishpachot Adama, Shelo Sam Kalkeinu Kahem, V'Gohor Aleinu K'chol Amonam, V'Anachnu Korim, U'Mishtachavim U'Morim, Lifnei Melech, Malkei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Can you cover the המלכות שלך היא לא מעטמך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם הארץ. ונאמר,
היה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
Acknowledge the recent passing of Mark Sigmund Neustadt, father of Celia and David Neustadt, and of Murray Seidel, father of Eddie Seidel. And we also acknowledge the yard sites on this second day of Tishrei of Marty Abeloff and Nathan Reifler. Mourners and those observing yard sites are invited to stand along with anyone else whose custom it is to stand for Kaddish Yatom, page 174. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא תברא חירותי והמליך מלכותי, בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקדושה בריחו. לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה תאמירם ביומה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. Amen. You may be seated. We'll conclude with Adon Olam, page 175.
Adon Olam Hashem Allah.
B'terem kol Yisir Nivra, V'ez Asor, V'ez Okol, Hazar Alech Shemo Nikra, V'yacharei Kiklot HaKol, V'vado Yimlot Dora, V'hu Haya, V'hu Over, V'hu Yineh B'tifara, V'hu Echad V'ein Sheni, L'chav Shiloh, L'chav Mira, V'yimei Shir, V'yitachlit, V'lo Ha'oz, V'ha'mizra, V'hu Eli, V'chai Go'ali, V'tzur V'evli, V'ein Tzara, V'hu Nisi, U'manosli, V'nakosi, V'yom Ekra, Yado Afkidruki, V'yetishan, V'yadira, V'imruki, V'viati, Adonai li, V'yodira. L'shana tova tikatenu, L'shana tova tikatenu, L'shana tova tikatenu.
Well done, group.